when you're playing poker, you're not playing against the house. You're playing the other players around the table, and therefore, through the eyes of an economist, that is a market, right? It's a perfect market. Okay? Luck is a short-term phenomenon, right? Luck is something which a lot of people talk very breezily about and never really define and drill down into. And if you're going to talk about it, you have to, because it's this. Luck is your short-term deviation from your long-term expectation as a result of that which you cannot control. I have come to the conclusion that one of the worst phrases that people use is, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. When companies say that, I think it's an impediment to people making brave decisions.
My guest for this episode is Caspar Berry. At the age of 16, Caspar starred in the BBC drama Byker Grove with Anton Deck before accepting a place at Cambridge University to study economics. He went on to write and direct for TV and film, but left it all behind at the age of 26 to move to Las Vegas and become a professional poker player. Returning to the UK 3 years later, he then built and sold a highly successful production company. He's presented poker for Sky Sports and was even the poker advisor for the James Bond movie Casino Royale. He's now a highly sought-after advisor to some of the largest organisations in the world, speaking on risk and decision-making. I first met Caspar back in 2018 when we were speaking at a conference together. He's a master storyteller and has the knack for simplifying the complex, so I'm delighted to have him on the podcast to share his knowledge. If you enjoy what you hear, please leave a review, like, comment and subscribe. It will mean the world to me and will help this podcast reach as many people as possible. You don't want to miss this. Enjoy. Caspar, welcome to the show. My first question for you. In life, what's the most important thing that you've ever had to pitch for?
Oh, well, not much. That's true. I've never had a job interview. I was very lucky when I was a film writer. I was always just commissioned to write things. I think when I was running my video production company between the years of 2002 and 2005-06, we had to do some pitches for that, which were pretty. I'll tell you what I'm going to choose, right? Because you throw this question to me out of the blue. I'm gonna pick something which did change my life, a pitch which changed my life. Okay, so here's what it is. The year is it's about 1992. And I got a job doing work experience with a company called Key Productions, right, in Newcastle, which was a small corporate production company. And they got this brief for a job, which they should never have received, right, because they were really small scale, doing like £10,000-12,000 corporate videos. And it was to produce this big 6-figure film for Hartlepool Marina, right, to add to be a sort of, huge, tourist attraction for Hartlepool Marina. Yeah. And I remember we got this brief, and Richard Johns, who became, a friend of mine to this day, 30 years later, said, have we got anything for this? And I went away and wrote a story, right? They weren't necessarily asking for a drama, but I went away and wrote a story about a guy who was press ganged into the Navy in 1812 or whatever it was. And we were selected and we had to pitch for it. And the guys coming out were 7 men in Armani suits from the corporate end of Yorkshire Television. And then me and Richard walked in. And anyway, we got the job. And it was off the back of that Richard asked me to write a feature film, which was produced by Film 4. And although I don't work in the film industry these days, really that pitch, the passion that I had for that story, the authenticity, I guess, and the simplicity, it changed my life.
That's amazing. I love how it's normally, one little drop in the ocean that has all of these ripples that you pitch, literally in the ocean for Hartlepool Marina, but you pitch for something like that, and that leads to feature film. I mean, like when that brief landed, and I'm assuming it's probably days of early email, but when that email came through, the thought of, oh yes, this will lead to a feature film couldn't have been further from anyone's mind.
Mate, it wasn't even early email. It would have been 1991. So I was 18. It was in my year out between school and university. So I was 18 at the time. Because Richard, bless him, he took me under his wing. I was directing TV commercials within 3 months of that at the age of 18. There was no email. It was just this. We still don't know why Key Productions got. It's probably a fact. I think it was a fact. We have no idea why Key Productions got in. But I mean, your point is absolutely right. Like, so I talk about butterflies, right? The butterfly effect, and so for me, that's what this is. It's a butterfly. It's just like this thing, as you say. I would have had no idea what it would have led to. Now, I did leave the film industry in 1999 when I became a professional poker player. So it didn't change my life in that respect. But it did change that whole decade for me. It shaped that decade, and in many ways, it did shape my life, but in a more circuitous way.
Fascinating. So, if that's the kind of the thing that kicked off that part of your career, are there any pitches or experiences in life that you've thought, that slipped through my fingers? I'd have loved to have had that opportunity, and seen where that took me.
Yeah, there's a lot of those. One that springs to mind is what year would this have been? About 1994, maybe 5. Channel 4. So I had this film being made by Film 4. Everyone knew that was in development. So a different part of Channel 4 asked me to pitch to direct a 10-minute short film, which again, I was only 21 at the time. Everyone else was sort of in their 30s. And the first story is that they didn't get hold of me by the deadline. The first year, 1993 or 2, they didn't get hold of me by the deadline, and I didn't get a chance to direct to pitch, and that was heartbreaking because it was like it was before email. Do you know what I mean? I think maybe the next year I was one of the first students to get a mobile phone. Do you remember the old Sony Mars bars?
Yeah.
It cost like about 60 quid a month or something. I had the Byker Grove money, and but it was before that. And so, how did you get hold of people? Like when students were in the halls, or we were living in a house without a domestic phone. Like, how did they even think that they could get hold of me? So I was so heartbroken. But then the next year, I got to pitch, and I didn't get it, and I was probably more heartbroken because I remember thinking like there are so few opportunities like this, which there were then, so few. And not getting it, I just thought was I wasn't going to. I felt like I'd missed a boat, and in some ways, probably I still do. Like I did. Like my life might have been different if I got that.
Interesting though, because you walk down one path, and by choosing that path, you can't walk down the other, which is the conundrum that we're all in.
Yeah. Your podcast is called Life's a Pitch, and you're starting off asking pitch questions, and it's so interesting because I'm not just saying this to be on brand. Pitches really, really can change your life. Getting them and not getting them, and sometimes, by the way, not getting them change it for the better. Like you dodged a bullet, sort of thing. There are lots of ways in which there are lots of reasons I wish I hadn't got that part in Byker Grove in 1989, and there are lots of reasons why I wish that Channel 4 hadn't made my feature film in 1996. Lots. But still, the moment that you get that thing as a result of that pitch, and it changes everything, it's so profound.
So take us back a little bit, because you've alluded to a couple of things there that I think are interesting. You've had a really, but you've had a very varied career. From acting to writing and directing, building and selling production companies, becoming a professional poker player, and now speaking on risk and decision making with some of the biggest corporations in the world. But where does that story start? Can you take me back to Caspar? At 5-10 years old, what did you want to be?
So, you asked the question 5-10 years old. We'll be here for an hour now. I was a really weird kid. So first of all, I was very shy until the age of 10, like really shy, and didn't mix well in groups. I mean, I was okay in school, but I remember I tried to join non-school groups in Essex, and I was quite posh, and Essex kids didn't really like that. And then at the age of 10, we moved to Newcastle was the first thing. And there was this theatre called the Tyne Theatre and Opera House in Newcastle, which is still today a unique thing because it's a stunning Victorian opera house which is effectively owned and run by amateurs. And they had this teen theatre school, and at the age of 10 I auditioned for it, and 2 months later they put on Byker Grove, they put on Bugsy Malone, and I got the part of Bugsy. Right. So again, that was an audition, not a pitch, but that completely changed my life because, first of all, like all the girls noticed me for the first time, and secondly, like I was somebody. Like I was doing something where people were looking at me, and I gathered that although I didn't like them looking at me after whatever it was had finished, and still don't, I really enjoyed that moment on the stage. I really enjoyed that. Like it allowed me to be or do something, and then I could stop being it or doing it. Which, by the way, is why I have a problem now in 2024, because I don't want to do Twitter or Instagram, or I don't even want to book, or I don't want to be in constant contact with people. But I love the hour on the stage, right? So that completely changed my life, getting that part. And then throughout my 10, 11, 12 into my teens, it was really weird because I had all this like theatre stuff going on, and all I wanted to be was an economist. And the really weird thing was, I hadn't done economics at that point, right? You couldn't do economics in my school till GCSE. And then when I started doing economics, I had this extraordinary natural gift for it. Like it's the only academic subject that I was really profoundly, innately good at. And ended up doing that at Cambridge University. That's how good I was. But like my parents all thought there was something wrong with me. Like he's Bugsy and Bugsy Malone, and he wants to be an economist. Why does he want to do that? And I still don't know to this day. And actually, when I was said to sort of throw away, like maybe that film, I wish it hadn't happened. In some way, I wish that it hadn't. Right, and I'll tell you why. We're trying to capture a lot of things here, but what happened was, at a very young age, all of these things happened for me at a very young age. I got Byker Grove when I was 16, and this feature film was made when I was still at university. And I didn't really know how the world worked, right? I just, things had fallen into these opportunities, and everyone was saying, well, you're really good at this, and this will happen. And then when all that run finished, let's say 1997, and I had to go to Soho and pitch new film ideas, like I didn't know how to do that. Oh, I've just said the word pitch. I really wasn't saying that because this is a podcast about pitches, but it's really significant that I hadn't pitched that film. Richard just asked me to write it, and so then literally when I got into that situation of going, so what's your idea, and let's write a treatment and do the, I didn't have a clue how any of it worked. I didn't have a clue how money worked or contracts work. It still all terrifies me to this day. And I had this moment in 2008. I was in Shanghai, having a really great time playing pool in this private pool club in Shanghai. And I got to talk to this banker. No, not a banker. He's just a finance guy in Shanghai. And he was in his mid sort of 20s. And he'd studied economics at Cambridge and then gone and done finance in Shanghai, and said, not everyone does, but he said he was going to retire at 30 and then decided what he wanted to do with his life. And he would have had like 10 million quid in the bank at that point. Wow. And I just remember thinking, I should have done that. because what I got from that is an idea about how the world works, right? Quite a lot of bankers' bonuses, and an understanding of money and all sorts of things which I didn't understand throughout my 20s. And then I could have decided what I wanted to do with my life. And who knows what I'd have decided to do, but I'd have done it all with much more of a basis, I think, than I ever had.
Interesting. I mean, that if I look at your career and your life journey from an outside perspective, it's incredibly exciting. Like I'm really curious as to how you leave the world of writing and directing behind and go. I'm going off to Las Vegas to become a professional poker player. And interestingly, as someone who just said, I don't really know very much about money, but studied economics at Cambridge University.
Yeah, that's
like talk me through, to anyone that's listening that's about to embark on an economics degree at Cambridge, beware, you're not going to learn much about money.
Yeah, you're not going to learn anything about money, I can tell you that. You can learn why certain models don't work, or not even that. Often they don't know. So, well, look, as you know, I'm very lucky now to be a speaker, as you said in the introduction, to speak to, very senior people in the world's biggest companies, and it's a real privilege. But as part of that, again, as I'm sure you appreciate, there's a Q&A in which they ask you questions about your life, like why did you choose to be a professional poker player and why did you stop being a professional poker player? And I'm always very wary because I'm painfully honest, I think, sometimes about rewriting history. And I'm always very wary about answering those questions in such a way that makes it look like there was some sort of big plan behind it. And there wasn't at all. I was... When I went to play poker, I specifically said to my agent at the time, I remember vividly saying, I want to be a leaf on the breeze for a bit. Okay? Because all those things had happened for me so quickly in my life that I hadn't gone travelling. Do you know what I mean? And I hadn't experienced serendipity and I've met this bloke in a pub and he does this and I hadn't lived like that. I'd lived in a very, very focused way from the age of 16, from the first from my first scene doing Byker Grove. We both had that experience of acting on film and television, and it's very seductive, it's very exciting, and I felt like the finger of God came down, this is honestly true, it sounds pretentious, and pointed to the director and went, that's what you want to do with your life, right? And so for the next 10 years I dedicated myself to doing that until I got to 25, 26 and was like, I don't think this is what I want to do with my life. What do I want to do? I don't know. So let's just try some things, which now we might call taking a risk. Okay. Although I don't advocate that people in my sessions take risks in this way, but sometimes it's good to do something different and to explore the unknown in a way where there's no plan behind it. And in fact, one of the things I'm very passionate about on the rare occasions when someone is foolish enough to ask me for advice is when we back with engineer success, it is always the product of specialisation, because success comes from focus and dedication and, pushing the envelopes and being better than other people, and innate talents and all of those good things. But it usually comes as a result of having found what it was that you wanted to do in the first place. And I don't think enough is talked about that in life, of trying to do different things. So a good book was written about it about 4 or 5 years ago, wasn't it? Range, which was about how a lot of good people, find that thing that they're good at by accident as a result of just diversifying. There's lots of good reasons why the human brain is actually wired to diversify first before it specialises. That's what being young is about, and that's not a bad thing. So yeah, that's really why I wanted to play poker. Was I just wanted to try some different stuff, and then I stopped playing poker because I was never going to do it forever, and I had to get back to life and the real world and come back, and I set up a company and then realised I didn't think I was a very good entrepreneur at all, but I had enjoyed the days when I was teaching my team and training them, and a couple of days when I was networking and doing presentations. And I thought I would like to give that a try. I didn't even know what a corporate speaker was because I'd never worked in a company. So I'd never experienced a corporate speaker. I'd never sat in an audience. But that did coincide with someone recommended that I do this thing called Tony Robbins in the London Docklands. So that was my first experience of a speaker. Which I think probably learning from the best. Yeah. And that was how I embarked on what has become the final chapter of my life, because I'm still doing it now 20 years later.
Sorry to interrupt, but before we continue with the episode, I've got a favour to ask. I'm on a mission to get this podcast in the hands of as many people as possible. So if you found what you've heard so far valuable, please, please, please like, comment, rate and subscribe. These things make a huge difference to our reach. And if you're open to it, if you happen to know just one person, someone who, just like you, would benefit from listening to these conversations, then please share the podcast with them. Let's get on with it. So if we think about that time in Las Vegas, there seems like there was a relatively large amount of unknown. You were stepping into a space that you weren't particularly familiar with. I'm assuming that you'd played poker before, and it wasn't you were literally landing on the tables without having done it. So how did you go about building that new skill set, and how did you develop? I think probably more importantly in that environment, the mindset of a professional poker player.
I mean, one word, basically reading. Don't want to sound like Warren Buffett or your dad, but I played poker in the summer of 1999. So in fact, my best buddy at the time and now, a guy called Nick Wellfall, who was on my corridor at university, he actually, let's just do the whole butterfly story, right? He loved Muhammad Ali. And so he wanted to go to Las Vegas to see Caesar's Palace. All right. So when we graduated from university, on my part, no interest or experience in gambling at all. In the summer of 1996, we went to Las Vegas and we happened to read this book on the plane, which I've still got, and bless it, I do owe it everything, because it explained pretty much what I teach now, which is the concept of expectation. And it was called How to Win at Casino Gambling. And the first sentence is, you won't win at casino gambling, right? But what it taught you was that so every bet that you place in a casino has an expectation which is negative because you're playing against the house, right? So at all of these games you will lose, but at some games you'll lose less than others, which is the aim of casino gambling, which is to buy as much fun as possible, right? So to lose as slowly as possible. So play these games, craps, blackjack, basic strategy, etc., etc. And I loved that, and I got it because that was pure economics. And then in the summer of '99, if you really want the proper story, okay, I very rarely tell this, so you're very privileged. We went to Las Vegas, and we went to a bar called the Voodoo Lounge, which is in the Rio Hotel, and it's beautiful. It has an outside view of the whole strip, which in the summer is gorgeous. And they used to do this cocktail called What the Witch Doctor Ordered, which was this fish bowl with dry ice bubbling, this whole cocktail, which is supposed to be like for a group of 6. But I ordered it and he didn't want any, so I drank it all. Long story short, I had alcohol poisoning. I was in bed for 3 days. So he didn't have anyone to play blackjack with, right? So he was like wandering around lost. He was really interested in poker because late night poker had just happened, right, on Channel 4. It's his 1999. And so he went into the poker room, and then he would come up to the room, and I was being sick off the edge of the bed, and he would say, "This is amazing. This thing is amazing. You've got to try it." And I was like, "Yeah, I will try it." I could leave the room. And at the end of those 3 days, genuinely, we went downstairs and I watched him play for about 3 or 4 hours, and then I started playing, and it was absolutely gripping. And I said to him on the plane home, I said, "I'm going to do that, I think." And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, I'm going to try doing that professionally, because I'd understood that, and for the benefit of people who haven't seen me and don't know, okay, very important. When you're playing poker, you're not playing against the house. Okay, so everything else that you do in the casino, you have this negative edge embedded against you. You will lose money in the long run. You can win on any given evening. When you're playing poker, you're playing the other players around the table, and therefore, through the eyes of an economist, that is a market, right? It's a perfect market, okay? And therefore you can get the edge yourself, and therefore poker is the opportunity to make a profit in the casino, okay? And I thought, I'm going to do that. He said, "You're mad." I said, "Not forever, not forever, but like 6 months. Let's try doing that. I want to be a leaf on the breeze." So I read 30 books. In England, I was living in Wales at the time. In Britain, I was living in Wales at the time, and then I went out on the 5th of January, the year 2000. And it was the hardest thing I've ever done, because with poker, it doesn't matter how much theory you know, executing in the moment is just as hard as knowing everything. But I rose to the challenge, really, and it was a challenge, but that was part of the point of doing it. That's a long story, isn't it? Sorry.
No, it's fascinating. Is it? I mean, is there a community? Is there in so many things? You know, when I look at my life and the things that I've achieved success in, there's normally been the Yoda figure involved. There's a mentor. There's someone that kind of guides you or challenges you. Poker seems to be very kind of insular. It's, you know, I don't know what I'm talking about, but it's all about visors and, you know, not making eye contact. So did you find a community and people that were generous in helping you succeed? So
I've always been aware of the fact that I didn't join the poker community, right? And I've always been sort of aware that was probably a downside. Listen, I didn't join it for 2 reasons. I'm a lone wolf. I don't like politics, and the poker community now, and even then, has this extraordinary amount of boring politics. And it's actually quite hard to sit on a table with someone who you like, and it's hard to take their money. It's even harder to lose it to them. So I didn't like all of that, right? I saw a tweet the other day, so it wasn't revelatory, but it just reading it on Twitter just made me go, oh god, yeah. And it said the most successful poker players of the last 30 years have all been people who had a support community around them, and it's so true. So the closest I had to that was this guy, my buddy Nick Wellfall, still commentator on poker TV shows. He quit his job and came and joined me. And so you just said the words there, we would be each other's community, and we would, push each other. And the more thinking and talking you do away from the poker table, the better you are in the heat of the moment. It's like, think of flying a plane, right? You drill all the things that can happen, so you hope they don't, but when they do, you're ready for them because you've drilled them, right? And then you said a really magic word about 3 minutes ago, which was mentor. To have a good poker mentor will make all the difference. I think in many ways, for a long time, recently now, the knowledge is so exposed. It's such a perfect market that it's probably less relevant. But there was a period of time where if you didn't have access to some of the ideas that made the difference between great players and good players, you just weren't going to make that leap at all. And maybe that is still relevant. I don't play at the highest limits anymore. But there's the knowledge has become so much more open and exposed now, and the underlying mechanics to creating the knowledge, i.e., mathematics, is so much more well known now. So I think it's harder to have secret winning strategies now. But poker has changed so much in those 20 years.
Yeah, fascinating. I mean, all of these things have evolved, don't they? But it seems like it's finite. There are only so many cards in a deck of cards, and there are only so many combinations that you can play. But actually, there's the idea that it's luck or that it's gambling. It's not. It seems to be problem solving, and that's what I'm hearing.
It's all problem solving. And let me just throw a few figures at you. So the first of all is there's 2.5 million possible 5-card hand combinations.
Okay.
So although it's very bounded, it's quite a lot. Now, as I always say, if that sounds like a lot, try life. Okay, a lot more. You're right. There's only 52 cards, but I'm sure you know the 52 factorial fact. Do you know that, the 52 factorial fact? It's an incredible thing. So 52 factorial is the number of different possible combinations there can be of those 52 cards, right? And you need to go work out 52 factorial, because what it is, it's 52 times 51 times 50 times 49 times 48, and it's a number so incredibly large. There will never, if you shuffle a deck of cards, that will be the first time in the universe that the cards have ever been shuffled in that way. It's 52 factorial.
Wow, that's mind-blowing.
It's this big. If you stand on the coast of Ireland, the west coast of Ireland, right, and you take a step and then wait 1 billion years, right, and you're counting every second, and then take another step and wait 1 billion years, and step all around the world whilst waiting 1 billion years with every step. And when you get back to the west coast of Ireland, take a piece of paper, right, and put it down on the ground, and then set off again, taking a step every 1 billion years, counting, okay? You won't get to 52 factorial until that pile of paper reaches the moon.
That's a mic drop moment. I've got nothing to come back with there. That's just blown my mind.
Those are the two things there. But let's just talk about luck very quickly, because you mentioned it. And if we're going to talk about poker and just the dynamics of it, luck's a really important thing. And it's important to remember something which I say in my presentations, which is this: luck is a short-term phenomenon, right? Luck is something which a lot of people talk very breezily about and never really define and drill down into. And if you're going to talk about it, you have to, because it's this: luck is your short-term deviation from your long-term expectation as a result of that which you cannot control. So let me just expound upon that. Your long-term expectation is what I talked about before in the casino. In the long run, you will lose in the casino because your expectation is negative. Can you win over any given spin of the wheel or turn of the card or evening, sometimes a whole trip to Vegas? Yes. Outliers and anomalies are people who win beyond what the law of large numbers dictates. Okay, because broadly speaking, you are going to approximate your expectation in the long run of anything, all right? And in fact, the long run, the definition of the long run, is the period of time over which the luck has evened out, all right? Because if you and I were to toss a coin 10 times, and I won 8 and you won 2, I wouldn't be a better coin tosser than you. I'd just have been lucky over that period of time, Yeah, I might even still be up, or you'd be up over 1,000 coin tosses, but over over a million coin tosses. What's interesting is the actual difference will become greater,
Mm-hmm.
but the proportionate difference becomes less. Okay, and therefore the difference between us, as a result of that which we cannot control, the toss of a coin, has basically become negligible, and that's what luck is. Now, come back to my very first point about these numbers. The medium term, the long term in life, is almost certainly arguably longer than any lifetime. What that means is that some people will die having been luckier than other people, okay? Because their child got leukemia, or they won the lottery, or let's just be humble for a moment, they were born in the West in the 20th century. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
We're all incredibly lucky, more than most animals and humans who've ever lived. But that's what luck is. It's our short-term deviation compared to a long-term expectation. And in poker, you hit the long term over a period of time. It gets longer and longer for reasons which I won't bore you with. But in my period, when I was playing, it was about 4 months of play. And over that period of time, you were basically paid according to the quality of decisions that you made. And I love that about it. Because whilst you might look at a poker table from the outside and go, oh, that's a game of luck, it's actually a perfect meritocracy.
That's fascinating. So what made you go, okay, I've done that now, I'm going to come back to the UK and build a production company?
So I get that question a lot. Obviously, it's a very good question. And sometimes I say this in answer to it. I go, I'm going to answer that question, but I'm going to lie. The reason I say that is because there are three answers to that question, right? One of the answers is, I just did, right? The other answer will take as long to explain to you as it took me to decide, which is about 6 months, because life is really complicated.
Mm-hmm.
And if we talk about the butterflies and the nuances, like sometimes you get up in the morning and you go, I'm not going to stop playing poker. And sometimes you get up in the morning and go, God, poker's the last thing I want to do today. You feel differently about different times, and different things pull you in different directions, right? And there was never a moment for me where I went, oh, God, I've just lost $1 million. I'm going to stop playing poker. I wasn't playing for that much money, by the way.
Yeah.
So that didn't happen. But broadly speaking, the lie is, what I whittle it down to is three things. Number one, I was never going to be world champion, right? I was not naturally a great poker player. I worked very hard, and it was the hardest I ever worked in some ways for every dollar that I made. Secondly, it had become boring, right? I hope there are people amongst you who've played or do play or might play in the future, and I hope they really enjoy it. But if you can imagine going to the same table, usually in the Mirage Hotel Casino, every day for 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, it becomes really monotonous. And then the final reason was, genuinely, I split up with my girlfriend, and I'm like, now's a good time to leave town. It just all made sense.
Yeah.
I was very happy to stop at that time. Yeah.
So you came back and you built a business which you then went on and sold. And as you said, you'd had no kind of previous experience of doing that. What has taking that leap and going through the highs and lows taught you about what you do now?
The running the business. What did running the business teach me about speaking? It's a good question. Well, I guess so. To put it in context, like all I'd done before playing poker was film and TV and directing TV commercials and writing and that kind of thing. And then there was poker, which was very odd and unique. And then I guess since poker, my life, and I think your life as well, is very much about the market. Do you know what I mean? We have to appeal to the market. So there's something about, acting, writing, which is about talent, and about honing your craft. And then speaking, which is also craft. But selling corporate films and speaking, which is about, you have to appeal to the market, and that can be quite brutal. And in both those jobs, it's where the power of the pitch comes in, because it's not just about how good you are, it's about how good people perceive you to be and how different they perceive you to be to other people. Selling quality is one of the hardest things you can do, because they don't know. They don't know until they get the feedback from the first group that do it. And if you're a speaker, that's the only group that do it very often. So it's about how do you convince people that you're good. And the reason why I hesitated, I think, answering this question is because I don't think I'm great at it. And I probably because I don't like doing it. Like, I want a world where I only get the jobs that I'm right for, because as I'm sure I don't need to tell you, sometimes as a speaker you just weren't the right person. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can feel it. 5 minutes in, you just go, this is not their key message. This doesn't work. But I feel like I want all of those jobs. I want all the jobs that I'm right for and none of the jobs that I'm wrong for. And I just want the world to be a very fair place. I've always offered, Dominic, so in both those things, the video production and the speaking, I've offered people 100% money back if they're not satisfied. I've always done that. It's the most natural thing in the world for me, because I'm like, if I don't do a great job according to what you want, I don't want to be paid. That's always been my just personal. It's not a sales line. It's not like John Lewis will refund the difference, or it's not to get people through the door. It's like, I genuinely don't want the money if you don't feel that I did a great job. And that's me going, like, I don't want this. I don't want to benefit from this job if I'm not really good at it. But if I am really good at it, I want to be well paid for it.
Having seen you on stage, you are really good at it. So when you're engaging with a corporate audience, many people who are listening to this will be working within large organisations and having to deal with risk and decision making on a daily basis. So what are some of the kind of key things that you see people getting wrong? And what do you advise people to do as a starting point to assess their quality of decision making?
Okay, I'm going to ask a slightly different question, which I decided before you threw that last sentence in, and I'll tell you why. Because I'm not. I talk very, as you've seen me. I have never worked for a corporation. Okay. So when I first started, I was talking very abstractly about decision making, and I still talk more abstractly than your average speaker. Okay, but it's become more and more practical based on having worked with a lot of people who work in corporate settings. Okay, and so what I decided to say before you threw that last sentence in, which was about what they should think about in the moment of decision, was, how do you make decisions in a corporate setting? Okay. And I have come to the conclusion that one of the worst phrases that people use, and I do not know why it's become so popular, is, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. Now, it's probably easier in theory, right, to go, I've done this, I'm sorry, than it is to go, can we do this? And probably right. But the point is, most people don't buy that there's going to be no consequences of having done the thing for which they need to ask the forgiveness, right? So when companies say that, I think it's an impediment to people making brave decisions, because it's not giving them the most important tools that I think I've identified in this 20-year journey, which is that what you need to create when making decisions in a corporate context is alignment. All right. Now, here's what I mean by that. I might complicate this matter a little bit, because I'm going to go around the houses a bit. But companies, publicly listed companies, actually have a legal duty to maximise shareholder value. Okay. That is really problematic, because the extent to which we maximise shareholder value is contingent upon a variable, which is precisely what I talk about, which is how much risk do you want to take? Also time, right? If you give me the latitude to take loads of risk and 10 years, I will create a greater return for you per year than if you say, I must do something without any fail in 2 months' time, right?
Yeah.
My return per unit of time will be greater in the first scenario than the second scenario. That's why Warren Buffett makes 17 to 25% returns, and he says to his shareholders every year at the annual meeting, don't buy shares in Berkshire Hathaway that you don't want to give to your grandchildren, right? Because what he's saying is, don't come to these meetings and judge me about, the stock performance of something that I bought 6 months ago. It's completely uninteresting to me, right? I've bought this stock because its 25-year returns are going to be solid, and they usually are. You acknowledge when he's made mistakes. So what I mean by that is that, therefore, what you need to do when you make decisions in a corporate context is to ask for permission, right, and information about the latitude that we have to make mistakes and errors and fail, and what I call negative feedback and negative metrics in the short term, right? Over what period of time am I going to be judged in this endeavor? And what is it okay to lose in the short term in order to achieve that? A lot of what I talk about in theory will boil down to this concept, which is how much are you prepared to lose in the short term in order to gain in the long term? Because the greater amount that is, by which I mean the greater volatility that you're prepared to embrace. If you were a share trader, you talk about volatility. The greater volatility you're prepared to embrace, the higher rewards you're going to get. That's the essence of high risk, high reward. So this idea of asking for forgiveness afterwards is an impediment, because people go, oh no, well, what if I ask for forgiveness and they say no? Yeah, that's not a great corporate culture. What you should be inculcating in people is the act of asking for permission and the act of creating alignment around the amount of risk that we all think is acceptable for us to take. And giving people, doesn't mean that alignment is going to be great, but giving people greater and greater latitude, sorry, not alignment, giving people greater and greater latitude over time as they earn trust is the key to them feeling confident and happy in making decisions which will get greater long-term returns.
And do you think that those same principles apply, in our lives as well? If we're starting our journey at 18, 19, that we are, because we have that, that long-term view, that, being married and kids and pensions and everything seems so far off, that you're kind of maybe more open to taking risks in those early years, and then as things become more finite and the confines increase, that we become more risk adverse?
Well, let's come right back. Brilliant link, well done. To my life story, what I was doing there was something quite different every 2.5 years, because in that acting period there was the acting, and then there was the TV commercials, and then there was the screenwriting, and then there was the running the production company, and then there was poker, and I was doing something different every 2.5 years. Some people say to me, "You're telling us all to take risk. You haven't taken risk in the last 20 years. You're still a speaker." And I say this: you do not. Why would you take risk, right? What is a risk? A risk is an opportunity with a greater potential for loss than the otherwise safer decision. Okay, so there must be a reason for taking that risk, which is a greater potential for gain. Now, I talk about return on investment and profit and stuff like that because we spend a lot of our time in the corporate world. But of course, a lot of those upsides are intangible. Jumping out of an airplane will give you a rush of adrenaline and dopamine and all those things. It's not going to make any extra profit, all right? And if you want those things, then you are embracing the actually very small risk of injury or jumping out of an airplane, okay? But it's the same thing in a company. It's the same thing with your life. For me, I love speaking. You know, Dominic, as well as anyone, better than most, that I have a slightly complicated relationship with it in terms of what do I want on that upside and what price I'm prepared to pay for that. And it's been a bit of a wrestle with me for the last 6 years in terms of answering those questions. But I love speaking enough to not to want to try and do other things, because I don't need to. I don't want any more upside than speaking has given me, which is I've seen the world, I've earned good money, I get 2 applauses a week, and the rest of my time, the rest of my life is my own. Do you know what I mean? And for a lone wolf like me, that's absolutely perfect. Why on earth would I throw that away? But one of the problems, and I've diversified and tried other things, and I've had that range, and I've found that thing, and I've focused on it, and I've hopefully not perfected it, but I've become good at it. Great. The problem comes when you're a company, all right, because of this obligation to maximize shareholder value, because companies aren't allowed to stand still. They aren't allowed to go, that's us, for 20 years, we're completely happy, that's fine. And so risk becomes important to companies, and I'm going to say this phrase, which will offend some people, whether they know it and understand it or not, because that's the obligation on a company. And the reason I say whether they know it or understand it or not is I will very often present my stuff to people who go, oh yeah, that doesn't really work for our company, they're very risk averse. And it's like, yeah, but money left under the mattress gets no return. Like, you only get any of your return because you take risk. It's just that most of them you take for granted because they become part of operations, right? But what we look at growth and innovation and new opportunities as being more risky because it's not the thing that we do every day. But actually, what we do every day is also implicitly risk-taking. That's how returns are generated.
Now, if I think back to what you were saying about poker, then part of taking a risk is that I think there's a phrase calculated risk, but I might rephrase that as educated risk. So you were talking about educating yourself about the ins and outs of the mathematics behind the poker table. And if we map that across into a pitching scenario, if I've got an idea that I want to pitch, there's an inherent risk to me there of going out and making a fool of myself, or of chucking a load of money at something that never becomes a thing. So in order to minimize the risk in those situations, is it about increasing our knowledge and our understanding of our audience, of what we're offering, of seeing all of those parameters? Like, what should we be doing?
Well, good question. I think there's a lot to unpack there. The first thing is you've drawn a comparison between risk-taking and pitching, which is I talk about like most weeks of my life, and I haven't done until this point in this podcast. So let's do this now. I think that one of the biggest risks that people can take in corporate situations is that, right? Is the smallest scale pitch. I've got an idea, I've got something to say. Even bigger risk when it's I don't like that, or I disagree with you. Do you know what I mean? Or I think we could be doing this different and better, right?
Yeah.
Those are that lowest level of personal interaction, of risk in terms of personal interaction, of coming back on something, of suggesting something new. I think are the absolute building blocks that will define risk-taking innovative companies versus their competitors, right? And I'm sure you're aware of this phrase, but it's pretty worth bringing it into the conversation. The idea of cultivating psychological safety in a corporate culture has become a buzzword. And I do think is one of the most important things that we can do. You know, the Pixars, the Apples of this world have cultures based on that idea that people feel that they can speak up, basically. And so that's really important. With your calculated versus educated, so I'm going to be a bit of a pedant here.
Please do.
I sort of have to be, because it's sort of like my nomenclature, really. So people will say, is poker a game of maths or psychology, right? And the answer is it's both, okay? The maths is fundamental. And most poker players in 2024 and some in 2004, thank God, because I was one of them, so I had an edge, will actually most of the time try and do a calculation, which is the origin of the phrase the calculated risk, right? Which can be defined. I can show it to you. As you know, in my presentations, I do actually put it on a screen. And some people hate it, right? No maths. And I get that. But I put it on for a number of reasons. A, because it gives this logical ballast to what I'm talking about that goes beyond metaphorical stories. And B, because it shows what people are doing subconsciously most of the time, right? Here's what I mean by that. Maths is very often a codification of subconscious processes. So 80,000 years ago, we would have known that when a baby was born, we had to go and hunt for more meat, right? That's long division, all right? But there was no concept of long division there. So we have the maths of risk and reward, which was given to us by Fermat and Pascal, which is a codification of what we're all doing all the time. Dominic, I've got this business that I'd like you to invest in. Are you interested? Say no. No. Richard Branson's in. Are you in?
Oh, yes.
Of course. Now, why? Well, because what's happened is your probability assessment, right, that this is actually a good idea has gone up, right? Now, you didn't use probability. You didn't go, it's gone from 32% to 48.9%, right? But that's the math side of it. But that's codifying what you've done subconsciously. If I said it could be illegal, now you're probably backing away, right? Because the likelihood of this new downside has come in, which is all part of this calculation, right? Now, the education is the idea that Branson's a good businessman and that you don't want to go to prison, and what are the laws in the country, and what's the likelihood that he's got the flush, and if people take a drink halfway through the hand, are they more likely to be bluffing or not bluffing? That's all the education, right? That's where poker is a game of psychology, because the psychology is what we call is educating your assessment, or what we call judgment, which is the probability. Your judgment of this person, that you trust them based on 48 years of knowing people, right, is effectively you saying, I trust them more than this person. That there is a higher likelihood that this person will deliver on time and on budget than this person. There's a higher likelihood that this person's telling the truth. Okay, you didn't do a calculation at that point, but what I'm trying to say in my presentations a lot of the time is, don't leave this room and get out your abacus. That's not what I'm asking you to do. But what I am asking you to do is to understand that you do have a mental abacus, right? And that what you should be trying to do is arrest control over that, okay, so that it isn't controlling you. All right. And that it may be the case that when you put your hand up or when you pitch, that someone says no. All right. And if they bring someone like you in, they'll have a higher chance of getting a yes. Right. That's what education's about. But calculation is about going, yeah, but even if I get 8 no's, if I get 1 yes and get my way on this, that's worth those 8 no's, particularly since, for this very specific context, 8 no's of rejection probably didn't cost you anything. But even in situations where it does cost you something, we can construct scenarios where 1 yes is worth 800 no's. That's what sales is, by the way.
I love that. I mean, yeah, thinking about it in that way does change everything, and it is all about that mental abacus. I've never thought about that before. So amazing. Caspar, I could geek out on this stuff all day. You've really kind of captured my imagination, but I'm going to bring things to a close. Final question for you: if you could go back and give that young man in Bugsy Malone one bit of advice, what would you give him?
When you're 14, you're going to go to the cinema on Westgate Road with a girl called Tonya Cade, and you're going to watch Police Academy 2. Kiss her.
I love it. Caspar, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Take care, man.
Thanks for listening to the Why Life's a Pitch podcast. If you'd like to improve the way you pitch and communicate, I'm giving away a special gift to all my listeners. We've developed the Pitching with Impact scorecard to help you benchmark your pitch performance in 6 key areas. It will take you less than 5 minutes to complete, and you'll receive a detailed, personalised report packed full of insights and ideas to help you improve and grow. Just head over to dominiccolenso.com/scorecard to get started.